Welcome to our fourth Filmmaker Film Watcher mini episode. I'm filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio.
No, I'm filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio.
I am filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio.
I'm 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 filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio. I'm filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio.
I'm filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio, and so's my wife.
Well, that felt a bit Spartacus.
That's Spartacus.
Oh, was that the wrong film? Can I just point out, that was the moment when I realised most of my family can't say your real name without stumbling. But all right, okay, it was Spartacus.
That was a good Spartacus reference.
But hey, aren't we doing a film called Gladiator 2
We
now?
are doing a film called Gladiator 2 after all of that. We've still got our
I was saying
listeners.
there's still anyone listening.
So usually we get to the point pretty quickly here. But yes, we saw Gladiator 2
Today.
and so we're going to be discussing this. So Greg, I'd like you to get on with it and talk about Gladiator 2.
In my best Gladiator... No, okay. All right, well... Gladiator single-handedly revitalised the historical epic film genre. It became the second highest-grossing film of 2000, and it won both critical acclaim and 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Actor for our local export, Russell Crowe. And it's remained popular over the years. Its 20th anniversary re-release a few years ago grossed another $5 million in Australia and the Netherlands, although its UK re-release earned only a little over $16,000. Perhaps that's why the sequel's Australian release here comes a week before its US release. Either way, it gives us a chance to get in early. The first film told the story of Roman general Maximus Decimus Meridius, who found himself on the wrong side of Emperor Commodus. After losing his wife and young son, he became a slave and then a gladiator in the Roman Colosseum. Quite a few of the characters died along the way as Maximus edged closer to his vengeance. Among those left standing were the Emperor's sister, Lucilla, and her adolescent son, Lucius. It's now 16 years later. Rome is ruled by 2 emperors, Geta, Joseph Quinn, and Caracalla, Fred Heschinger, who are intent on expanding the glory of their empire. As part of this, the film opens on a stunning battle of Roman ships invading the North African seaport of Numidia, led by Roman general Acacius, Pedro Pascal. And we learn later that Acacius is now married to Lucilla, Connie Nielsen from the first film. When Numidia is vanquished, one of the prisoners, Paul Mescal, is sold as an enslaved gladiator to Macrinus, Denzel Washington. If you've seen the trailer, you'll know who our gladiator hero turns out to be. The first half of the film feels a bit like a cut and paste from Gladiator 1, but then the plot takes some interesting turns in the latter part of the film. Despite some visually impressive parts early on, the sea versus land battle, and someone being collected by death to cross the waters to the afterlife, I didn't enjoy this film. I found myself becoming increasingly disengaged from the story, and this bothered me. In other circumstances, I might say that this is perhaps because this is not my genre. But I've spent the last week or so watching and enjoying both the first Gladiator film and the 1964 film The Fall of the Roman Empire, which was obviously a key informing source for the first film. So it's not that. My problem is, I don't think enough was done to invest the characters as characters. I think this is most emblematic in both films' treatment of the gladiators' swiftly dispatched wives. They existed only to provide an easy impetus to the hero's journey, but somehow this worked better the first time around. I also felt some fine actors weren't given enough to work with. For example, Paul Mescal as the hero, who I admired in All of Us Strangers, just didn't seem to have the gravitas to carry the film. Fred Heschinger, who was warm and believable as the grandson in Thelma, felt out of his depth. Derek Jacobi, the other returning character, was easy to miss. So, overall, I was a bit meh, which is a lot to carry across a 2.5-hour film. Ricardo, how did you go at the spectacle?
I'm a big fan of the first one. It came at a time, that first one, which we'd had the end of the 90s. We'd had a lot of independent cinema. You had a lot of the rise of Miramax, the Tarantino films. You had Kevin Smith. You had a lot of Robert Rodriguez coming through. A lot of Sling Blade, Billy Bob Thornton. A lot of Shine for Australia. They all were doing very well. These independent film. It was the rise of the independent film at the end of the 90s. Mm-hmm. Then this big Ridley Scott Roman epic comes and just blows everyone out of the water. It was exciting to see.
And from a low expectation base.
Yeah.
Like they tried to keep it quiet what they were filming because they didn't think the studio would go for a sword and sandal epic. They were working out the story as they went. You know, they had one day where they sent the crew home because they didn't know what they were filming the next day. It was very organic.
Yeah. It's spectacle. Absolutely. It's big, epic. I just found it hard to be moved by it.
Yeah.
For the majority of the film, right? I felt that although executed very well, it was a bit of a cut and paste of the first film. It actually was. I mean, it really was for 2/3 of the film. And then when it started to find its own voice and find its own feet and find its own story, that last third of the film was exciting, and I started to get a lot more invested in it.
No, see, by that stage, I was out of it.
No.
And there were things I just didn't
understand. I was never out of it.
No, I was. And, we don't want to spoil what happens in that latter part of the story.
Oh, definitely not.
But
No.
when it happened, I understood what that character was on about,
yes.
but I still didn't really get why. And I spoke to my son on the way home from the film, and he was the same. He said, yeah, I don't really know.
Okay. No, I got that.
You can't explain it now.
No, I can't, but I got that. I did get that character. But I'll get into Mescal. Look, I think he's fine in the role, and I think it's the script. I think it doesn't give him a lot to work with.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's very one note. He's no Russell Crowe in it. I mean, look, there's one scene...
Well, Rusty had that absolute gravitas.
Oh, my goodness me. Look, there's one shot. That first shot you see Russell Crowe in the first film, when it's that battle, that very opening battle, and you see him in the woods, and he looks up and he sees a bird in the sky or something, and then he's looking at that, and then he looks at the battle. He goes through a range of emotions in this one shot, and it's such a brilliant performance. And Mescal never gets to even that. And you see so much in like 5 seconds in Russell Crowe's performance there that Mescal never really gets to, but still, he's fine in it, and it's okay.
He's okay.
He's okay. He's fine. Denzel was very good.
He was, actually.
He really was, and I think he does steal the film in terms of performance.
Actually, that might be right, yeah.
Pedro Pascal is you know what? He's got a lot of presence when he's on screen, but there's just not a lot to do with him. He's a really underused character, and there was none of that. There was none of that in the first one.
Well, the first time I saw Pedro Pascal, or took note of him, was in the Wonder Woman 1984 film.
Oh, I didn't like him in that.
No, I didn't at all. And
No.
I didn't think he was very good as an actor.
No,
and then I saw him in other things, like in The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent with Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, I never saw
and
that yet.
I thought he was fantastic in that. So my opinion shifted. But again, if I'd seen him only in this, I'd be thinking,
Well, I think he's still got a lot of presence. I mean, I liked him the Mandalorian, which is he's just behind a mask. But I still think he's underused. But I did feel, and he did a lot with it though, because again, it's a screenplay. Doesn't give him a lot to do. But there's a scene in there which I felt for him.
I think we both agree the problem's the script, and they've had 24 years to do it.
Yeah, I know.
And I wonder if maybe the first time around, because it was relatively outside the studio pack,
yes,
and they had a lot more liberty, and the guy who wrote the original script, he went through a number of rewrites, but he'd had that idea almost 30 years prior.
Yeah.
So he'd brooded on it a lot, and then it went through this organic process. Apparently each night the scriptwriter, the director, and Rusty Crowe sat down and talked through what was coming up next and so on. This felt a lot more like almost studio cookie cutter.
Yeah, it does. I could almost hear the executives going, let's make a Gladiator 2. Let's just keep it very similar, but let's make it bigger. Did you know the Colosseum had water in it? Let's do that. Let's do sharks. Let's do this. Let's do that.
Apparently the Colosseum did have water and
Well,
ships.
it did.
Just not the sharks.
So,
Chucking some sharks.
You could just see it happening. But it's still...
And we'll get Spielberg to do cross-promotion.
Let's talk about the battles, because they are great. And Ridley Scott does that very well.
Oh, I thought the first one was a standout. The rest were... I just... By that stage, I just, like, stepped out of the film.
Well, it felt samey. Again, it just felt a bit samey. And so... But I had a good time. This is the thing. I still had a good time. But one of the things which really grated on me was the overuse of lines from the first film.
Go on.
The whole strength and honor thing was overused.
Do you know where that came from?
Yeah, I know. It came from Russell Crowe's high school logo or something, right?
Yeah.
And that just gets overused. The Echoes in Live.
Did you like the opening titles? It was kind of like
I love
oil
that.
paintings
No,
of the
I love
first
that.
film.
The opening titles are really good, but do you know what the funny thing is? Every time they go to a flashback of the first film, I felt more emotional. I felt emotive, right? Because I think it got it right, and even the cinematography, I found it was grittier. That you know, in that first battle in Gladiator, that you felt it was cold, it was damp, you felt you were there. You know, whereas this is shiny. It's very shiny, glossy. The colours pop. I felt like the first one just got the cinematography right.
Now, you brought your family to this film.
I did.
And I brought my younger son.
Yes.
And we both heard your family gasping a couple of times in the latter part of the film.
Yes.
When certain things happened.
Yeah, but the reason why is because it started finding its own voice, right?
Did you hear me and my son giggling at the start of the film?
No.
We giggle because when it opens at the sea battle, and just before it happens, you meet the woman who's his girlfriend, and they get married, and we nudge each other and say, well, she's a goner. And then, whoop, she was gone. And that's what I mean about, it was lazy cut and paste. Let's give him let's just whack a character in. Let's give him, a reason to be all vengeful. That's right. But she's not a real person. She's just a placeholder.
Just a placeholder, yeah.
And it was a bit like that in the first film, but it worked better.
The first one was a little bit better. I actually felt for that. I don't know. It was just a bit different. It was interesting. I liked the opening shot because I thought it was a very,
this one?
Of this one. Because in that wonderful shot of Maximus's hands going over the wheat fields.
Yeah.
Right? It's a wonderful shot. And this opens on Mescal dipping his hand in grains of wheat. And I just thought that was a really nice synergy.
So look, just one little footnote before we get on to maybe our scores for the film.
Yep.
Did you know that this was not the first attempt to write the script of Gladiator 2?
No, I didn't know
and
that.
Do you know who wrote the first attempt at the behest of Russell Crowe?
Who?
Nick Cave. So a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know who that is. But
I think I did hear about this somewhere.
Nick Cave is Melbourne born and bred. Singer, songwriter, actor, writer. Quite well known around some parts of the world.
Oh, I think he's a really good writer.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the proposition and.
Well, he wrote this script, which I've read. It's part of my prep. I've been reading it this week because it is available online. It's not hard to find. Russell Crowe said, "Oh, look, why don't you write the script for the sequel?" And he said, "But there's a bit of a problem. You die at the end of the first film." He said, "You can work that out." So the story he wrote. Both Maximus and his son Marius come back from the dead into Rome. Marius is now a fully grown man.
Yeah.
Lucius is the bad guy. The remaining son.
Really?
Of Lucilla is the bad guy, persecuting early Christians on behalf of the Roman emperor and the gods. And Maximus comes back to try and protect his son, who's become an early Christian. And without revealing his identity. Not a lot in the script, at least. Not a lot of battles, except towards the end. And there's a Colosseum gladiatorial battle as well. But at the end of the film, spoiler alert, because Maximus has come back from the dead, he cannot die again. And so at the end of the film, he ends up fighting in the Crusades and the Vietnam War, and I think another war, and ends up working in modern day in the Pentagon.
No.
But the weird thing is, we never find out what happened to Marius, even though he came back from the dead what happens to him is completely undisclosed.
Okay,
It would not. There is no way it would work in this kind of franchise.
No.
But there's a kind of interesting, almost Seventh Seal kind of film in there, I think.
I actually think it would be actually a really good film because he writes well, and
There were some lines
as
in it-
bizarre as that sounds.
Well, there were some lines in it that were very good and some parts that felt quite creaky, but it was a first draft.
Yeah.
And, the whole thing about, but hang on, what happened to the sun is a bit glaring.
Yeah.
But, look, it's an interesting read.
Yeah. So getting to the scores of this,
Yes.
What are you going to give this?
I'm going to give it a generous 6.
Okay.
I just feel like script, story, characters, as people that you care about, it just wasn't there for me.
Look, I'm giving it a 7, right?
Yep.
I still think it's executed very well, and I think let's remove the first Gladiator out of it. I still think it's a solid story, and I do think it's okay, and it tells that story. It's just not as well as the first one. I think the last third gives it that 7 for me. I think that's when I started getting really invested heavily into it, and that's when you heard some of the gasps. Coming. So that means if we're gasping, it means we're feeling. For the majority, I wasn't feeling much, but then I was. So I'm giving it a 7 for that. See, I'd give the original Gladiator probably a 9, right? And so, and this is a few points back from that. I don't think it's below that at all.
Now, before we entirely finish, we should just say where we saw the film today.
Absolutely, yes.
Because we went to a relatively new cinema in Melbourne called FOMO, F-O-M-O.
Yes.
We don't actually have any advertising relationship with them. Maybe we should check them out one day, but that's not what we do at this moment in time. But it was a really nice, impressive setup. It's a new cinema. Has a great sense of humour. It's in a place in Melbourne called Brunswick.
Yes.
And there are all these rejigs of famous movie posters
Yeah,
where the
it is on the
word
walls.
Brunswick was put in its place.
Yes.
Including a poster for Alien which said, "In Brunswick, no one can hear you scream."
Yeah, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the Brunswick Chainsaw Massacre. It's
An American in Brunswick.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually loves cinema. I actually really think it's a cinema which loves cinema. You go to quite honestly, most of the time these days you go to a movie house like Hoyts or Village and whatnot. It's okay. You go there, it's a multiplex. You feel like
It's a sausage factory experience.
It is. Whereas when you go to places like FOMO,
who love cinemas and the cinema going experience.
Absolutely, and they're working hard at that cinema going experience as well to try and make it a great experience. We sat in the cinemas, we ordered food, we did all these.
You discovered the honey and cinnamon popcorn. I know.
Did. Yeah, it was very nice. But it was really good. It was a great experience. So if you're in Melbourne, get along to FOMO. It's a really great cinema, and it sort of gives me experience. Like I like going to the Astor Cinema at the Palace. I always have an experience.
We always
when I
talk
go
about
to
the
Palace,
Astor,
and or the Baldwin Cinema, or anything with a cinema feel or a feel like
a sense to it.
A sense like that you're watching cinema. So this felt like that, and so I think they're doing a really good job there. Yeah.
And where can they send their check?
I know, but thank you for listening to our Filmmaker Film Watcher mini episode. Please follow, like, subscribe to us on TikTok, on social media, anywhere you can find your
Send
podcasts.
checks.
and please tell your friends to get onto us as well.